You're cruising along, leading the team. Everything is humming. The forecast looks great. And then, bam, life just blindsides you.
Oh, yeah.
It's that unexpected phone call, the devastating diagnosis, the sudden crisis you just never, ever saw coming.
And it always hits right when everyone around you, your board, your staff, your congregation, is expecting perfect clarity, perfect stability. Exactly. It's the brutal, uncomfortable truth of leadership. Holding a high position, it doesn't grant you immunity from personal collapse. If anything, it places you in what the sources call a glass house, where every pressure point is amplified.
So our deep dive today is really about reframing that whole experience.
It is. Because the sources show us something pretty surprising, that your hardest seasons aren't just interruptions to your leadership. They're actually, well, they're difficult invitations to forge a deeper, more resilient way of leading.
I love that, because the old myth of the unshakable, almost robotic leader, that's thankfully fading. But what's replaced it is this high wire balancing act. We have to master what the material calls the dual posture, being simultaneously human and effective, vulnerable yet stable.
Precisely. You are expected to be the anchor for everyone else.
Yeah.
You have to put on that required, Sunday morning mask.
Right.
While internally, your own ship is just taking on water. And the real danger in that reality is that leaders, they start to develop what we call the iron soul.
The iron soul, that's a powerful image. It almost sounds like a necessary defense mechanism.
It does, but it's a hardening of your inner life. It's a shell built to protect you against scrutiny and pain. And the problem is, while it might work for a bit,
Right.
it eventually fractures trust. People can feel you holding them at arm's length.
So we have to dismantle this whole myth that a leader has to be immune to suffering.
We do. And that myth, it feels less spiritual and more stoic,
Yes. The idea that competence requires complete emotional detachment.
Exactly. It's a theological error of immunity. But when you look at the narratives we were actually given, the great leaders were fundamentally wounded. I mean, think about Jacob. He led with a permanent limp.
He didn't hide it. The limp was his story.
It was his story. And Moses, he was so crushed by the burden of leadership, he literally asked God to kill him.
That's in Numbers. And it wasn't a moment of just simple doubt. It was profound, utter exhaustion.
Utter despair. And then you have Peter, the designated rock of the church, whose leadership was built directly on the shame of his own failure.
Right, of betraying Jesus 3 times.
These were not Teflon leaders. They led through failure, through exhaustion.
Yeah.
And this is why the Apostle Paul's example is so compelling. He wrote to the church in Corinth, the church that was already questioning him.
Critical church, yeah.
And he admitted he was, and I'm quoting here, burdened beyond our measure, above strength, so that we despaired even of life.
Wow. Why would you give them that ammunition? Why be so raw with a critical audience?
Because Paul understood something critical. That authenticity, when it's shared appropriately, it actually breeds authority. He wasn't looking for pity.
No.
He admitted his despair to elevate the sufficiency of God's grace. His crisis wasn't a distraction from his leadership. It was the classroom for it.
So he's basically saying, look at my weakness and then look at the strength that sustained me. That's the strength you can actually rely on.
Exactly. So we have to move past this idea that we can keep the work self and the hurt self permanently separated, which brings us to compartmentalization versus integration.
Right. Okay, so compartmentalization, for the short term, that's just survival, right?
Absolutely. If you get devastating news 5 minutes before a huge presentation, you have to seal that watertight door, like on a submarine, just to function.
But the sources really stress the danger of treating that as a permanent fix.
Because it's not. If you leave that door sealed forever, you get what's called the leakage effect. That high-pressure emotional stress, it doesn't just stay put.
It leaks out.
It leaks out as inappropriate anger over small things, moral failures as a kind of escape, or even somatic symptoms, chronic migraines, gut issues.
I've seen that so many times. The leader who is totally calm in the crisis meeting but then screams at their kids about spilled milk when they get home, that's the leakage.
That is the leakage, precisely. And the other danger is a loss of empathy. If you constantly numb your own pain, you just lose your capacity to feel, period, your pain and the pain of others.
And that's how you become that unfeeling boss trapped in the hypocrisy trap.
Feeling like an imposter. Integration, on the other hand, it means acknowledging the pain before God, before trusted counselors, and allowing that pain to inform your dependence, not pretending it doesn't exist.
And this framework, it gives a whole new meaning to Paul's famous thorn in the flesh. He prayed for God to remove that limitation, but the answer was, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness.
The irony is just. It's profound. God refused to remove the thorn because that crisis, that limitation, it was the very thing that became the scaffolding for his grace.
Without that thorn, his pride might have ruined his entire ministry.
It very well could have. That constant reminder of his weakness was the strategic thing securing his dependence, the limp. The limp becomes the source of his lasting power.
Okay, that forces us to see our limitations not as liabilities, but as a potential source of a much deeper authority. Let's shift from the theological to the biological, because when a crisis hits, it is at its core a physiological event.
Absolutely. When you face a real threat, a health scare, a legal threat, your amygdala, your brain's threat detector, it just slams the panic button.
And your whole system floods with cortisol and adrenaline.
Right, the cortisol hijack. Fight, flight, or freeze.
We all know that feeling, the heart racing, the tunnel vision. But what is that actually doing to a leader's brain?
Well, cortisol is brilliant for survival, but it's terrible for strategy. It effectively starves your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic, reason, impulse control, long-term planning.
So during this fog of war, you are literally less intelligent.
You are. Your ability to handle complexity and nuance just drops. Instead of seeing 10 variables, you see 2. Good or bad, friend or foe.
Black and white thinking.
Exactly. And you end up making bad, permanent decisions based on temporary cortisol-fueled emotions. So if a leader is compromised, they must voluntarily suspend the right to make what we call level 1 decisions.
Okay, let's clarify that. What is a level 1 decision? Because that sounds like critical, practical advice.
A level 1 decision is any high-stakes, irreversible, or long-term strategic move. So, a major restructure, firing a key employee, signing a huge contract.
Things you can't easily undo.
Things you can't undo. If your prefrontal cortex is compromised, you just don't have the right to steer the ship into that kind of territory. That's the protocol of the pause.
And if you can't trust your own brain, you have to. You have to outsource it. Which brings us to the Council of Three.
Yes. And this needs to be a formal process, not just calling up whoever answers the phone. You need 3 specific people.
Okay, who's the first one?
The first is the competent peer. This is someone who understands your industry, your organization, your context. They can look at the facts without getting caught up in your emotional fallout.
Got it. The second one is, this is the one we all need but maybe hate to find, the truth teller.
This person has to love you enough to hurt your feelings. They're the one who calls out the paranoia, the self-pity, the black and white stories you're telling yourself.
Your reality check.
Your reality check. And the third is absolutely essential, the pastor or counselor. This person is committed to caring for your soul, your inner life, not just your success.
Your soul, not just your role.
Exactly. This Council of Three is your organizational seatbelt. It keeps you from crashing the car when you lose control.
Beyond the strategy, though, there's the physical crash. The source material called it the silent killer. The Elijah complex.
This is such an insightful connection. Elijah, after this massive spiritual victory on Mount Carmel, calling down fire from heaven.
Peak performance.
Peak performance. He immediately experiences this massive physiological and emotional depletion, runs into the desert, prays for death.
He went from the mountaintop to the valley in, what, a single day? And the critical insight here is what God did for him. It wasn't theological correction.
No, it was physiological care. God sent an angel who gave him rest, a warm cake, and water. The message was simple. Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you.
So Elijah's despair, it wasn't a spiritual failure. It was a physical crash from burning too much emotional fuel.
It was. Which means our first line of defense in a crisis is just. It's practical maintenance of the body, the physiological floor.
Okay, so what does that look like?
It's a few non-negotiables. First, the 7-hour rule for sleep. You have to maintain a basic level of recovery. Second, choosing fuel over comfort food. Stress makes you crave sugar, but those lead to crashes.
Right, which just mirrors emotional instability.
Exactly. And the third element is movement. Movement is critical. Stress hormones like cortisol are metabolized by physical activity, a 20-minute walk, a run, anything. You just can't expect to lead a supernatural mission with a neglected natural vessel.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, let's get into the art of managing that internal chaos day to day. We need to talk about containment, which is the healthy alternative to toxic suppression.
Right. Containment is the ability to put your grief or fear into a sealed container. You acknowledge it's there, but you seal the lid so you can carry it without spilling it all over your team.
Whereas suppression is just shoving it in a closet and pretending it doesn't exist.
Yes. And the practical mechanism for this is something called the parking lot ritual.
The parking lot ritual, I like that. How does it work?
It's a simple transition ritual. You drive to work, you park the car, and before you turn off the engine, you do a few things. First, visualize a container. Second, mentally place the burden, the diagnosis, the fear inside it. Third, you pray the seal. You hand the burden over to God, or whatever your external source is, for the next few hours so you can do your job.
And then you go into your professional setting.
Yeah.
But the key step, the thing that stops this from becoming suppression, is what happens on the way home.
Absolutely crucial. On the drive home, you must consciously open the box again to process what you contained. If you never open it, that pain starts to decompose. That leads directly back to the leakage effect.
So containment is temporary, but suppression is chronic.
You've got it. And this leads us to another critical distinction. Privacy versus secrecy. Privacy is healthy. It's necessary boundaries. Secrecy. Secrecy is toxic hiding. It crushes the soul.
A leader can be private about the details, but they can't be secret about the fact that they're struggling.
That's it. You have to ensure at least one person, a counselor, a mentor, someone outside the organization, knows the full, unvarnished truth. The burden is just too heavy to carry alone.
And when you do decide to share more widely, you have to manage who gets what information. This is the strategy of sanctified vulnerability.
Right. Vulnerability has to be for the benefit of the listener, not just the catharsis of the speaker.
Okay, so how do you do that?
We can use Jesus's model of the circle of disclosure. There are 3 rings, and the truth you share depends on the audience.
So the outermost ring is the crowd, the organization at large.
To the crowd, you share the general reality. Something like, my family is navigating a difficult health season. The goal is clarity and humanity, without the detailed emotional baggage that would just distract them.
Okay. The second ring is the committed your leadership team.
Here, you share the functional impact. This is where you set boundaries. I'll be present on Tuesdays for meetings, but I'm unavailable on Fridays for treatment. The goal is operational continuity and trust.
And the innermost circle, the core, your council of 3.
Only to the core do you share the raw truth. I am scared to death. I don't know how we're going to pay for this. I feel like quitting. The goal there is just spiritual support and emotional processing.
The mistake is collapsing those circles.
It is. Dumping raw truth on the crowd just creates chaos, not clarity.
And that clarity lets us redefine what professionalism even means in a crisis. It is far more professional to communicate your limits and delegate than to just power through while you're compromised.
Absolutely. We are called to lead not from a pedestal of perfection, but from the fellowship of the wounded. The sources point out that the scars Jesus kept after his resurrection, they weren't weaknesses.
They were his credentials.
They were his credentials, the proof that he went through the pain and didn't run from it.
And the same is true for the leader who navigates that valley with integrity. You can't go back to the person you were before. You're forged, denser. The limp that Jacob carried, the scars Jesus bore, that's the legacy you gain. It gives your leadership a unique authority.
And let's end where the source material does, with the scandal of grace. The fact that God entrusted his most precious possession, his people, to the man who had just failed him most profoundly, Peter.
So that suggests a leader who knows intimately their own capacity for failure is actually safer than one who thinks they're invincible.
It's more trustworthy.
So if that's true, then you have to ask yourself this question. What specific belief about your own strength, your own competence, or invincibility must you allow to die in this season so that a deeper, more trustworthy source of strength can rise to take its place?
Because the leadership that's forged in this fire, that is precisely what the world is desperately waiting for.